My 13-year-old nephew met my wife for the first time and said, "I've seen you before." She froze, and what happened next left me shocked. What happened after that moment changed everything I thought I knew. Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a 30-year-old man who has been through a lot recently. Although some time has passed, I still feel like it all happened yesterday. I wanted to talk about this with someone outside of my family and friends. So here I am. Let me start from the beginning. I was born long after my brother. He was 16 years old when I was born. Due to the large age difference, we never had a close sibling bond. Although he spoiled me a lot, I felt that he treated me more like his own son than like his brother. By the time I was old enough to remember anything, my brother had already left for college. When I was 10 years old, I attended his wedding. They were already expecting a baby at that time, so I was excited not just for the wedding, but also to meet my nephew and have another kid to play with. 5 months after the wedding, my nephew Tony was born. I still clearly remember visiting him in the hospital right after he was born. I was so excited to see his little face and felt an overwhelming amount of love for him. After Tony came home, I spent all the time I could with my brother to help take care of him. As the years passed, my love for Tony only grew. I always offered to take care of him whenever my brother needed help. Instead of seeing ourselves as uncle and nephew, Tony and I felt more like brothers. That's why it was so hard for both of us when I had to move to another state, Florida, to study and work. But I made sure to always call home and keep in touch with my family, especially Tony. The distance did not break our bond. In my last year of college, I met my wife, Kelly. She was a soccer star, and I still don't know how I caught her attention. Since I wasn't interested in sports at all, I spent most of my time reading in the library. But one day, Kelly found me there and started talking to me. What I loved most about her was how confident and charming she was. Later, after we had been together for a while, she told me that she was actually nervous to talk to me, but I would never have guessed it from the confidence with which she approached me. We went on several dates and quickly realized that, although we had different interests, we fit very well together. We shared the same sense of humor and spent all our dates laughing until our stomachs hurt. It didn't take long for us to make our relationship official. I always made it clear to Kelly how much I love my family, so she met them through many video calls. The only person I hadn't told Kelly about was my nephew Tony. Although Kelly had already met almost all the important members of my family, she still hadn't met Tony. However, I did talk about him a lot. One day, Kelly asked me why she hadn't met my nephew yet, even though I talked so much about him. I said, "Honey, I haven't introduced you to Tony because he's only 11 years old. I want to protect his innocence from my adult life." She replied, "I don't think 11 years old is too young. I'd like to meet him and be a part of his life too. Tony is the most important person to me, but he's still a child. He doesn't need to be involved in my romantic life," I explained. "It seems like you're keeping me away because you doubt the future of our relationship," she said. "What? That's not true at all," I assured her. "You were afraid to introduce me to Tony in case things didn't work out between us. You don't want to introduce him to someone who won't be a constant in his life," she continued. "You've got it all wrong. It's about protecting him, not doubting us," I said. Okay. Let's just leave it alone. Just understand that I see a long future for us," she said. "But I'm simply not ready to mix our worlds yet," I explained. I understood why Kelly was upset, but I wasn't ready to involve Tony in that part of my life. I wanted to protect Tony's innocence, even though deep down I knew I wasn't really doing that. In my mind, he was still that baby I met for the first time in the hospital, and I wanted to keep seeing him that way, at least until he became a teenager. 2 years after we graduated from college, Kelly asked me to move in with her, and I gladly accepted. I was excited to live with a woman I was so deeply in love with. During that time, I also met Kelly's entire family. Kelly was still a little hurt that I hadn't told Tony about her, but she decided to let it go instead of insisting on the subject. I could tell it still bothered her because she would mention it briefly before changing the subject. When Tony turned 13, I waited a couple of months before finally telling him about Kelly. One day we connected on a video call while Kelly was out running. "Tony, I have something to tell you," I said. "What is it?" he replied. "I have a girlfriend." "Really? Oh my God. Tell me everything," he exclaimed. "Her name is Kelly. We met in college, and we've been together since my senior year." "Is she a good person?" he asked. "She's the best. You're going to love her, I assured him. Then I can't wait to meet her. Well, we were actually planning to come over for Thanksgiving. Wait, seriously? That's bad timing. What do you mean? I asked, confused. I got into that boarding high school I've been talking about for years. I have to be there next month. That's amazing, Tony. I'm so proud of you. Yeah, but I won't be there for Thanksgiving. Don't worry about that. Anyway, I'm planning to marry Kelly, so you'll have plenty of time to meet her. You're already planning weddings? I love it, he said, laughing. Tony looked directly at Kelly for a few seconds, his eyes carrying confusion that quickly turned into recognition. Before I could ask what was happening, he pointed at her with a surprised expression. I've seen you before, Tony said, clearly confused. Kelly went pale, as if all the blood had drained from her face at once. I looked from one to the other, trying to understand what was going on. Tony's words echoed in my head, and I felt a chill down my spine. Something was clearly wrong. Where have you seen her, Tony? I asked, trying to stay calm, while Kelly seemed unable to move or speak. Tony hesitated for a second, as if trying to recall some specific detail. She's Dad's girlfriend. I've seen her at our house several times, Tony replied, frowning. I thought you knew each other, since you were always there too. My mind stopped. Every word he said felt like a blow. Dad's girlfriend? The world around me began to spin, and I felt my throat go dry. I looked at Kelly, who now had wide eyes and a look of pure panic. This isn't true, is it, Kelly? I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. Every second that passed without a response from her felt like an eternity. She finally opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just mumbled something incomprehensible. Tony was looking at both of us, clearly realizing that he had said something important, and maybe even wrong. Alex, I can explain, Kelly finally managed to say, her voice trembling. Explain what? I demanded, now feeling the anger grow inside me. You were with Tony's dad? You were cheating on me? With my brother? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All that love, all that trust, the conversations about marriage, everything now felt like a big lie. And the worst part was that Kelly couldn't even deny it. She just looked at me with pleading eyes, while Tony seemed to realize for the first time that something was very wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Alex, she started, but I was already losing my patience. Since when, Kelly? I demanded, my voice now sharp. Since when have you been cheating on me? She lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. I knew the truth was coming, and part of me didn't even want to hear it. But I needed to know. Since before we moved in together, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I stood still. Before we moved in together? That meant that while we were making plans for our life together, while I was introducing her to my family and talking about the future, she was betraying our trust. Not just cheating on me, but cheating on me with my own brother. A knot formed in my stomach, and I felt nauseous. So that's why you insisted so much on meeting Tony, wasn't it? I asked, my voice filled with contempt. Because you already knew my brother and wanted to keep up appearances. You wanted everything to look normal while hiding your visits to his house. How could you? Kelly began crying more intensely, covering her face with her hands. Tony looked shocked, not knowing what to do or say. He was a 13-year-old kid trapped in adult drama, and I felt a deep pain realizing that he was involved in all of this. You were never honest with me. I continued, my voice now almost breaking. I loved you, Kelly. I was planning to marry you, to introduce you to Tony because he is the most important person to me. And now I find out you were with his dad? How could you do this? She tried to approach me, extending her hand, but I took a step back, refusing any contact. Please, Alex. I made a mistake. It was a mistake, she pleaded. A mistake? I laughed bitterly. This wasn't a mistake. It was a series of choices. You chose to deceive me, chose to be with my brother, chose to lie to me day after day. There is no excuse for this, Kelly. At that moment, Tony started crying as well, feeling the weight of everything that was happening. I didn't know, Uncle Alex. I thought you knew about all of this. He sobbed, his eyes wide with despair. I approached Tony, kneeling down to be at his level, trying to ignore the whirlwind of emotions inside me for a moment to comfort him. It's not your fault, Tony. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? I said, my voice softening a little as I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You just told the truth, and you are not to blame for any of this." Tony nodded, still crying. I turned to Kelly, who was still standing there, with the expression of someone who knew everything was over. "I want you to leave," I finally said, my voice cold and determined. "It's over, Kelly. I don't want to see you anymore. You destroyed everything we had." She tried to argue, but I raised my hand, signaling her to stop. "Leave. Now." Kelly hesitated, but then she turned and left, still crying. I stayed there, kneeling beside Tony, trying to process everything that had happened. I felt a mixture of deep sadness and intense anger. All that time, all that trust, everything had been destroyed in a single moment. Tony hugged me, and I hugged him back, trying to find some comfort amidst the chaos. My brother, my own brother, had done this to me, and Kelly, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. After Kelly left, I remained silent for a while, still hugging Tony. The pain of betrayal and the revelation was intense, but something else began to grow inside me. The need for answers. I needed to confront my brother. I needed to hear his side of the story. I needed to understand how this had happened. I hugged Tony for a moment longer, then carefully wiped his tears and tried to give him a comforting smile. "It's going to be okay, Tony. But now I need to sort some things out with your dad. All right?" I said to him. He just nodded, visibly shaken. I didn't want to involve him more than he already was, so I left him with my mother, who was visiting and had noticed that something very serious had happened. I quickly explained that we needed to talk privately, and she agreed to take care of Tony. I got into the car and drove to my brother's house, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. Every mile that passed seemed to increase my indignation. How could he do this to me? He knew how much Kelly meant to me. And even so, I arrived at my brother's house and knocked on the door hard, my patience running out by the second. It took a few moments, and when he finally opened the door, his face showed surprise at seeing me there. "Alex, what happened?" he asked, but I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "We need to talk now," I said, walking past him and entering the house. He closed the door behind me, clearly confused by my attitude. "Sure, what's going on?" he asked again, seeming genuinely concerned. I turned to him, my expression serious, trying to contain the anger I felt. "It's about Kelly," I started, and I could see his expression change immediately, from surprise to something I couldn't quite identify. "Kelly? What happened to her?" he asked, somewhat hesitant. "Don't pretend you don't know, Robert. I know everything. I know you were with her," I said, my voice breaking a little. "I know you were having an affair with my girlfriend." Robert's face paled, and he took a step back, completely stunned. "What? Alex, wait. Where did you get that from?" He stammered, clearly in shock. "Tony told me. He recognized Kelly and said she was your girlfriend. How could you do this to me? How could you betray me, your own brother, like this?" I exploded, feeling the anger bubble and the tears form in my eyes. Robert looked completely lost. He opened his mouth several times, trying to say something, but nothing came out. Finally, he took a deep breath and shook his head. "Alex, I didn't know it was Kelly. I never knew she was your girlfriend. She never introduced herself as Kelly to me," he said, his voice desperate, trying to reach me. "She told me her name was Rachel." For a moment, I was speechless. My mind was in a state of confusion, trying to process what he had said. Rachel? She was pretending to be someone else? But even so, the betrayal was still there. "Do you expect me to believe that?" I asked, my voice filled with pain. "Do you want me to believe you never realized she was the same person? And even if she used another name, you were still with me while being with another woman. You still betrayed me." Robert seemed on the verge of tears now. He ran his hands through his hair, his expression full of regret and despair. "Alex, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was the same person. We met about a year and a half ago, and she told me she was single. I never connected the dots. I never thought you and she could be the same person," he said, his voice breaking. "If I had known, I would never have done this. I swear, Alex, you're my brother. I would never hurt you like that on purpose." There was sincerity in his eyes, and that only made the situation even more painful. Because even if he didn't know, even if Kelly had pretended to be someone else, the fact was that my own brother had gotten involved with the woman I loved, and nothing he said could change that. It doesn't matter, Robert. You were with me while maintaining a relationship with another woman. I trusted you, and look where that got us. I said, feeling the anger turn into something darker, a deep sadness, a sense of loss that seemed impossible to overcome. Robert approached me, trying to reach out, but I took a step back, refusing any contact. Please, Alex, forgive me. I would do anything to undo this, anything to regain your trust, he said, tears now running down his face. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing the regret in his eyes, and something in me knew he truly hadn't meant to hurt me. But the damage was done, and there was no going back. It didn't matter that he didn't know. It didn't matter that he had been deceived by Kelly. The pain was there, and I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. I need to leave, I finally said, my voice low and emotionless. I can't stay here. I need time. I need space. You hurt me, Robert, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. He nodded, the pain clear on his face. I understand. Just please know that I love you, Alex. You're my brother, and I would give anything not to have caused you this pain, he said, his voice broken. Without saying anything else, I turned and left the house, feeling an overwhelming weight on my chest. That wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it was the only one I could accept at that moment. I left without looking back, knowing that my relationship with my brother would never be the same. As I drove back home, the emptiness inside me seemed to grow, absorbing every positive thought I might have had. It wasn't just Kelly that I had lost, it was also the trust in my own brother. I needed space. I needed time to figure out how to move forward. And above all, I needed to find a way to deal with the pain and betrayal that seemed to have torn every piece of my heart apart. When I got home, I found Tony sitting on the couch, his eyes still red. He looked at me, as if searching for some sign that things could go back to normal. I just sat next to him and hugged him, feeling my own tears fall again. It's gonna be okay, Tony, I whispered, more for myself than for him. We're gonna be okay. Somehow we'll get through this. And there we stayed, just two brothers, trying to find comfort in each other, while the world around us seemed to have crumbled. When I prepared to leave my mother's house, Tony came to me, his eyes still red from crying. He seemed unsure, as if he didn't know whether he should say something or just stay silent. I couldn't leave him like that. He wasn't to blame for anything that had happened, and as broken as I was, I didn't want him to feel responsible. Uncle Alex, Tony began, but the words wouldn't come out. I simply approached him and hugged him tightly. I felt his small hands wrapping around me, and he started sobbing again. That moment hurt more than anything else. I had always wanted to protect Tony from anything painful or difficult, and now there he was, hurt by something I could never have prevented. It's gonna be okay, Tony. I promise, I said softly, holding back my own tears. I didn't know if it would really be true, but in that moment, it was what he needed to hear, and it was the promise I was willing to try to keep. I hugged him for a long moment before pulling away and running my hand through his hair. Take care of your dad, all right? And take care of yourself too, I said, trying to give him a reassuring smile, even though inside everything felt like it was falling apart. Tony nodded, his eyes still wet with tears, and I finally stepped away, giving him one last wave before leaving the house. I knew there was still a lot to resolve, but for now, I needed distance. I needed time to breathe and figure out how to move forward. When I got home, I was greeted by a flood of notifications on my phone. Messages and more messages from Kelly. She was begging to meet with me, to talk, and try to work things out. Words like, "I'm sorry," and "please forgive me" were repeated in almost every message. I just sighed and, with the same determination I had when I sent her away, deleted each one without even opening them. That chapter of my life was closed. In the following days, it felt like I was trying to navigate through unknown territory, one day at a time. I went to work, came back home, and focused solely on maintaining a routine. Sometimes it felt like I was on autopilot, just going through the motions that kept me moving without really processing what had happened. But I knew I needed that. I needed time to heal, even if that healing came through the simplest, most mundane routine. It was at work that I found a kind of refuge. I threw myself into my projects and dedicated myself fully. I volunteered for any extra task, took on responsibilities that others avoided, and made sure to deliver everything in the best way possible. Not because I was seeking recognition, but because I needed to occupy my mind. I needed something to remind me that I still had value. As time went by, I began to see the fruits of that effort. My boss noticed my dedication and offered me a promotion. I began leading an important project, something that made me feel useful and capable again. Little by little, the sense of loss and pain was replaced by a sense of purpose. I was building something for myself, something that no one could take away. It was during this period that I met Sophie. She wasn't like Kelly, and at first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to enter into a relationship again. I was afraid of trusting, afraid of opening up, and ending up being betrayed again. But Sophie was patient. She didn't push, didn't try to rush anything. From the beginning, everything between us was simple and honest. We started as friends, going out for coffee, laughing at small things, and gradually, that friendship turned into something more. With Sophie, I learned that love didn't have to be complicated, that it didn't need to be a roller coaster of highs and lows. She was kind, fun, and genuinely cared about me. She knew about Kelly, knew about what had happened, and never judged my hesitations. On the contrary, she respected each of them and gave me the space I needed. I remember the first time I told her I loved her. It was a simple moment, without grand gestures or declarations, but it was sincere. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, when I turned to her and said, "I love you, Sophie." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears, and hugged me. In that moment, I felt that I was finally leaving the past behind. As my life moved forward, Kelly seemed to fall apart. I heard about her through mutual friends, people who still had some contact, or heard news indirectly. After we broke up, her life was never the same again. She tried to move on, tried to start other relationships, but it seemed that no one wanted to stay with her for real. Maybe it was the weight of the wrong choices she made. Maybe it was the guilt she carried with her. But the fact was that Kelly ended up alone. Financially, things weren't going well for her either. She lost her job due to impulsive decisions and, without stability, saw her personal projects fail one after another. She even sought help from some friends, but many of them no longer wanted to get involved. More and more, it seemed that life was exacting a high price for all the lies and betrayal she had committed. My brother, on the other hand, managed to move on, though our relationship was never the same again. After that day, there were months of silence between us. I simply couldn't look at him the same way, and the pain of betrayal was an abyss that seemed impossible to cross. But over time, Robert reached out to me again. He apologized more sincerely, acknowledging his mistakes and how much he had hurt me. It wasn't easy, but eventually I accepted his apologies. Not because I had forgotten what he did, but because I didn't want to carry that weight for the rest of my life. Even so, the distance remained. We were no longer the inseparable brothers we once were, but we were cordial. We knew that, somehow, we needed to coexist, especially for Tony's sake. Robert seemed to have learned from his mistakes. He distanced himself from toxic relationships and focused on being a better father to Tony. And in some way, I respected that. Tony, for his part, grew up and became an incredible man. Despite all the difficulties he faced when he was just a kid, he showed a strength and resilience that made me immensely proud. He always kept in touch with me, and our conversations, little by little, became lighter and more carefree. Whenever we met, there was that inevitable moment when we laughed about the past, about how chaotic everything had been. "Remember when I said I had seen Kelly before?" Tony would say, laughing. "And how speechless you were." "Ah, how could I forget?" I would reply, laughing along with him. I think it was the most surreal moment of my life. We laughed because, in the end, we had overcome it. Each of us had found a way to move on. Me, now married to Sophie, happier than I ever imagined I could be. Tony, grown up and building his own life, with dreams and plans that I knew he would achieve. And even my brother, who, although he had made mistakes, managed to restart and became a better person because of it. As for Kelly, the last I heard of her, she was still alone and trying to find some direction. There was no resentment on my part. I had truly loved her, but that love had turned into a lesson. A lesson about trust, about choices, and about the value of respecting oneself. Kelly made her choices, and now she faced the consequences. I moved on. I left the past where it belonged and allowed myself to live a future that made me happy. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.